Dirk Spokes Canterbury.
Good morning, thank you. I'm Dirk I am the submissions convener for Spokes Canterbury. Spokes thanks Council for advancing the completion dates of the major cycle routes and for the focus on keeping rates rises and borrowing down. Using the major cycle routes as a way to secure much-needed central government funding for quake repairs and to upgrade infrastructure is smart. But major cycle routes are only part of what people need to make cycling a first choice. A key part of what people need and have been requesting for decades is not in this plan. Completing local cycle networks to connect the major cycle routes. This plan must fund this long unmet need. Council has plans and our policies in support of active transport, sustainability, creating safe, healthy, livable communities, and is embarking on confronting climate change. Thank you. Active transport is vital if these goals are to be achieved. About 2/3 of the major cycle route funding is from the central government. About half of the costs are due to non-cycle related infrastructure improvements. Accounting for these factors, Council's allocating about 6% of the transport funding to cycling. Over 7% of Christchurch commuters already are on bicycles. More would like to be. Infrastructure already delivered has achieved unexpected usage, yet the funding remains inadequate. Total funding for cycling infrastructure over the next 3 years is about $89 million. Of that, about $7 million is for non-major cycle route projects. About $5 million of the remainder is to get cyclists from Cransford Street over to the Papanui Parallel. The desperate need for cycle infrastructure and networks serving the northern and eastern areas is not addressed. About $2 million remains for other cycling infrastructure. This is about 0.5% of the 3-year transport spent. In its 3-year life, this plan offers $40,000 for cycle parking, $8.1 million for car parking. This stark contrast shines a bright light on what Council supports and what is not a priority. Between street furniture, commercial use, landscaping, and bicycles parked willy-nilly on footpaths, the disabled community will quite rightfully be seeking relief, as will people who cycle. It is clear that the needs of people who cycle is not what drives decision-making. This plan is business as usual, with some smart capture of central government cycling funds for projects with multiple benefits. On the plan webpage, the mayor tells us it is vital that we develop an emissions reduction program to ensure that we meet our targets of net carbon neutrality by 2030 as a council and 2050 as a city. Local Government New Zealand's declaration on climate change commits councils to promoting walking, cycling, and public transport. It calls to provide infrastructure and services useful in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and enhancing resilience. To achieve these goals requires drastic cuts to transport-related emissions and to road construction. Electric cars are still cars, albeit with a lesser carbon footprint. They still require massive roading projects and expense. They don't reduce congestion, parking demand, or improve road safety. Active transport achieves far greater benefits by reducing congestion, rates, greenhouse gases, and improving road safety while supporting transport mode choice and improving public health. Assurances that this plan supports active transport and the effort to reduce emissions are belied by the funding priorities and projects it advances. At best, this plan is not well aligned with needs or goals. We don't change by making the same mistakes. We have to be brave enough to do what is needed. That may be what some of you thought you were committing to when signing on to the local government's leader's declaration on climate change. This plan must support that commitment. Time is of the essence. We can't wait for the next long-term plan to sort things out. Transport spending is long-lived. Council needs to shift funding from car transport to active transport. Climate change is already upon us. Spokes asked that at least 15% of all transport spending be for active transport with cycling infrastructure guided by the needs of people who cycle. As active transport becomes more common and essential, this percentage will need to increase. A community succeeds when both leaders and citizenry are able to hear each other and respond appropriately. Council needs to better inform, to listen, to empower, and to respond. People need to understand why hard choices must be made. We know that business as usual will not solve our transport problems. Fortunately, we can do better. Now is the time to start. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your submission. I actually, I like your comment in your submission around the 10% of the car parking funding for cycle parking or other type of infrastructure. I think that's something we potentially should be looking at doing. But you don't make any mention of public transport. And I'm wondering what Spokes' views are on the public transport offering as well as, say, active transport and where it fits in and the priorities and funding that we should be thinking about in that space.
Spoke supports public transport, but public transport has been eating a lot of money while serving a very small percentage of the commuting public. Cycling infrastructure has been neglected for at least 40 years, likely longer. There's a huge deficit. We also see that while we have put millions, actually tens of millions into public transport, the usage numbers have not greatly increased. Whereas with cycling, we put in the cycle infrastructure and we exceed the expectations immediately. Why aren't we doing more? I mean, people are voting with their feet or wheels, and they're clearly giving you a message that's clearly being ignored.
Thank you, Dirk, for your submission. One of the ways, it's as clearly suggested widely, that we improve active transport is by having the different pathways, I guess, joined up better. So I'm just wondering if you've got any suggestions around that, especially in relation, for example, to the secondary routes, which would then join with the major cycleways, and including, and also footpaths and connections to some of the suburban centres.
Yes, and Spokes would love to have a cycle advisory panel or to work with staff on that. It's way too detailed to go into here. And short of you deciding we're going to spend the next 4 hours with a map discussing routes. But yeah, we'd be happy to. We've offered it in virtually every submission we've made, and we've been ignored.
Just two questions, but kind of related. There's just been some news come out recently around the increase in cyclist injury. And just thinking about the submission that you're making and thinking about the comment that you've just made about not being involved in things like route selection design, I'm just trying to understand, I guess, from your point of view, in terms of whether or not the cycleways that we've got, in terms of safety and in terms of effectiveness, are the right direction, or whether there's a need to sort of review the designs, review the kind of priorities to have. I know you want us to increase the budget, but I'm really just trying to understand from a safety point of view around the existing ones and the proposed ones, whether they're meeting the demand or the areas that you see are not being done.
I understand your question. I think it comes down to each cycle route has different realities on the street. And we would be, again, happy to meet and work on those. I accept that it is challenging. But when you have things like in the Justice Precinct, the way we're going to deal with cars and bicycles is to simply tell bicycles they no longer have the right-of-way. Oh, good, thank you. I wasn't up to date. Thank you very much. But there are issues like that, and I think it's that nitty-gritty. Spokes has been saying, we would really like to work with you on that, and that's been a one-sided thing. And I just want to comment on cycle parking. In cycle parking, you have had numerous instances, Sign of the Kiwi Parking Review, October 18, Suburban Parking Policy, Old Redcliffe School, Scott Park, which don't address cycle parking. Scott Park and Old Redcliffe School don't include any cycle parking. They include parking for boats, for cars, but not for bicycles. Sign of the Key, we didn't address the need. Am I to understand that the recreational cyclists up there on the weekends aren't parking? I mean, this is what I'm saying. I really believe that you need a cycle advisory panel, you need cycle champions and staff, because frankly, it's not happening. Thank you. And thank you to all the cycle champions around the table.